Alright folks, over the last 15 years, we've watched our various survivors venture through extremely dangerous locations in order to reach safety. But as we know, not all safe places were created equally, and not all dangerous locations were equally lethal. So today, I wanted to explore a range of locations across the Walking Dead universe to determine what was truly the safest and deadliest place to be during the outbreak, while breaking down why certain locations had clear advantages or disadvantages over others. And while this is a discussion that could go on forever if we tried to consider every location on the planet, I'll be focusing mostly on places we've directly seen or heard about on screen since we have direct confirmation of their status during the outbreak. So with that, if you end up enjoying this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you dropped a like and sub on your way out for more content like this regularly. Now, starting out with the safest locations, there are actually quite a few options to consider. As we've seen with locations such as Herschel's farm, the countryside was often a far safer option when considering dense populations were what caused the virus to spread quickest. Living on a farm not only positions you away from the chaotic hotspots seen in urban areas, but offers natural sustainability through renewable crops and access to well water, which, if maintained properly, could provide enough resources to survive for years. Though, if we are looking for the safest location to be during the outbreak, there are some things to consider here. For one, with most refugees fleeing the cities by the thousands, the odds of struggling survivors coming across your isolated farm in hopes of receiving sanctuary grows exponentially. And at a time like this, knowing who to trust would be nearly impossible until it's too late. The same logic goes both ways, with refugees fleeing the cities combined with the eventual ear-ringing explosions and glow of Operation Cobalt. You could only imagine just how many walkers would be attracted from the surrounding areas, potentially leading a horde of the dead right to your land. And as mentioned, although access to crops could keep you fed for a lifetime, your livestock could just turn your land into a dinner bell for straggling walkers at any time. On the surface, a farm seems like a no-brainer for riding out the outbreak, but at the end of the day, just like any fortified settlement, surviving on a farm still came down to a roll of the dice. One day you could be planting carrots without a walker in sight, the next, you could be swarmed and running for your life. Or, if you're extremely lucky, you could die of old age without ever seeing a living or undead visitor, period. Next, I wanted to discuss the open sea, as many coastal survivors had often turned to boats during this chaotic period. Obviously, with no ground to walk on, the threat of the dead overwhelming your ship basically becomes non-existent, which is by far the greatest benefit of this location. One of the toughest missions you can take on during the apocalypse is crossing great distances, but with a boat, mobility is your strength as you can chart your own course and avoid danger with great visibility. Being on the water gives you the freedom most survivors could only dream of, and with the right preparations, you can sustain yourself for weeks or even months without touching solid ground. Though that is kind of the issue here. Not many survivors were prepared to set sail for an unknown amount of time, so unless you were on some high-tech, water-filtering ship such as the Abigail, you were largely relying on your surroundings for sustainability. And although food here is a renewable resource, you would more than likely need to rely on rain for water, which could be unpredictable, almost guaranteeing your eventual return to land where the promise of death awaits. Beyond the usual threats of nature, one of the biggest issues you need to worry about on the open water is other survivors, as some had quickly began utilizing the lawless nature of the apocalypse to invade passing vessels like pirates. If the boat was carrying too many survivors to invade, they would often just capsize them, while those unfortunate enough to be boarded were either killed all the same or taken in and forced to work as a pirate themselves. All while a walker-free voyage was never even guaranteed to begin with, as the dead would often just follow the fleeing survivors out to sea, filling the ocean with their floating corpses which could end up stuck up in your engine before leaving you stranded. Hell, you could just accidentally sail into a neighboring country's waters and get yourself shot if said country still had a functioning navy at the time, such as what we see with Mexico. So although avoiding the threat of being eaten alive is much easier out at sea, the unique threats the ocean poses does not make it the safest place to be during the outbreak. but what about small islands? Surely having access to plantable crops, along with the benefits of being away from densely populated areas, would make these the most desirable places to be during the outbreak, right? Well, yes, but again, that is part of the issue here. With an island, you inherently have something other people want, which would stand out on a map a lot more than some random farm. And although your experience with the dead will be far less than those on the mainland, you still have to deal with walkers randomly washing ashore, such as what we see with the Geary family. Again, a lot of these factors do come down to luck and foresight. Theoretically, you could immediately hop on a boat and sail to an island before never seeing a single walker or fellow survivor again, but from what the Walking Dead universe almost always shows us, luck is hardly on anyone's side in this chaotic world. So instead of looking at locations that could theoretically work in the long run, let's take a look at locations that did. Of course, I am referring to the super colonies of Portland, Omaha, and Philadelphia, with Philadelphia being the most successful, influential, and lore-heavy of the bunch, which we'll mostly be focusing on here. With a population of over 200,000 civilians 10 years post-outbreak, these cities now have all the modern-day amenities most had lost over the years in the wasteland, including access to water treatment plants, power, air travel, and more, but they were just as chaotic as any other during the early outbreak. The only difference being they had someone fighting for them to secure their safety in the long run, such as what we see with the Pennsylvania National Guard's battle against the US Air Force 2 weeks after the initial outbreak to combat Operation Cobalt, which, if you're unaware, was a protocol approved by the federal government which saw the Air Force drop napalm on the streets across the country in a last-minute attempt to exterminate the dead. A form of stability was eventually achieved in these super colonies, but all the death and suffering endured to get there just can't make cities like these the safest places to be during the outbreak in the Walking Dead universe. The situation isn't much better in super colonies away from dense metropolitan areas such as the Commonwealth either. Sure, the walls went up and a military was formed, but when your government actively likes to make people disappear at will or sabotage the population's safety for political gain, you're not really living in the sanctuary that was advertised. So if every relatively safe place still has problems that could be lethal through no fault of your own, what other locations are we really left with? Well, I think an honorable mention we haven't seen on screen would be somewhere extremely far north like the Yukon or Alaska. Sure, the elements there are the real enemy as walkers freeze in place when they get too cold, but I mean, people have been surviving in these conditions since, well, forever, so I don't see why that would change. But what I think is the definitive answer here is a location we have seen on screen, that being Joe's bunker from Tales of the Walking Dead, or any single person bunker really. Joe didn't just survive the outbreak, he straight up skipped it. If you were a wealthy enough person prepared to spend your life alone underground, congratulations, you beat the apocalypse. The biggest threat to yourself in this world is other people, and I don't just mean in a fear the living way. Even if you trust someone with your life, a single health incident in the night could leave an undead corpse roaming around your base. So although we've seen groups living in bunkers in the past, Joe's idea of eliminating the possibility of this happening altogether through isolation is objectively the safest option to take. While the Clarks were getting themselves involved with other people's wars, or Rick's crew were slowly dying in the prison one by one, Joe was eating cereal while watching reruns of old football games as if unfazed by all the death outside. Being alone in a well-stocked and hidden bunker doesn't just allow you to avoid the dead completely, but guarantees your safety from plunderers or outside events such as Operation Cobalt. If you could truly spend your life alone underground, you would die old without being torn apart. The issue with Joe was that he couldn't be alone following the death of his dog, which sent him into a heavy depression, eventually forcing himself to leave the safety of his bunker in the name of companionship. However, that was an issue with Joe rather than the bunker, and although I think a lot of us would struggle with that aspect, I don't think it could be denied the bunker was the safest location to be in during and after the outbreak in the Walking Dead universe. So now that we've settled on the safest location, let's get into the deadliest. Naturally, I think it's safe to say no matter what, a country with a population around the 1 billion mark is gonna be far more dangerous than anything we've seen to date. But again, we're only really focusing on locations that have appeared on screen. And although there is a novel called The Walking Dead Typhoon that depicts the outbreak in China, that is only canon to the comic universe, so for all we know, some of these countries could have somehow survived in the TV universe. I mean, probably not, but you get my point. So let's focus on what we know. When it comes to determining deadly locations in the Walking Dead universe, the most important factors we're looking for are highly populated and densely structured or confined areas. Right away, any major metropolitan city in America is on the table. This doesn't just come from the overwhelming hordes of the dead, as any city around the world would have been dealing with that, but of course, the fiery execution of Operation Cobalt, which doomed most American cities for years to come, with those who survived only doing so with luck. However, it's hard to determine who exactly had it the worst before the bombs dropped. Theoretically, those within hospitals should have been screwed, as most of these medical facilities were naturally the epicenters for the outbreak in their areas. Though this also made hospitals the authorities' first targets. So once the military arrived to clean the mess up the best they could, from what we've seen, most medical professionals were escorted out to the best of the soldiers' abilities, while anyone who looked even remotely sick was executed in the halls. The arrival of the military in these cities did make a difference for those who were in areas designated to become protected safe zones, though these locations were under martial law, which often stripped its civilians of their rights and separated families. Those who grew sick or mentally unwell were taken away and never seen again, before all were eventually abandoned and left to burn by the soldiers on the night of September 10th by the flames of Cobalt. So basically, if you were attempting to make it by within an American city, your options were to either navigate the streets alone while avoiding soldiers and the dead alike before being burned alive, or be heavily oppressed by soldiers before being burned alive. Yeah, not great, though it could always be worse, as at least you had the chance to flee to the countryside if the opportunity presented itself, whereas those on the island of Manhattan were essentially trapped with nowhere to run from the start. With a population of over 1.5 million residing in Manhattan alone, you can only imagine just how difficult it would have been to navigate the streets during the first few days. But it was the bombings that really doomed its survivors, as every major and minor bridge to and from the island was taken out, cutting off the city's connection to the mainland for years to come. With nowhere for the copious amounts of walkers on the island to disperse to, Manhattan would quickly become the home of a mega horde made up of 1 million cold bodies strong, which would wander from street to street, taking out anyone unfortunate enough to be caught in its path. The military in the early days had tried their best to fight the dead while pushing their corpses down into Manhattan's sewers. But all this really did was doom those taking shelter below, as the toxic fumes from the bodies made it impossible to survive down there long term. Most cities in North America were nightmares during the early outbreak, but Manhattan was hell. Here, it didn't matter if you were in a hospital at the start, as the undead were too dense for the military to even reach the locations that were meant to become safe zones in the first place. Though, with all that being said, the danger for the most part was always visible, and over the years, once the flames of hell were extinguished, we began to see many survivors come out of the shadows to form factions. So if you managed to keep your head low while navigating the skyscrapers above, there is a small but legitimate chance you'd survive the rotten apple for years to come. So if my choice for the most dangerous location we've seen in this universe isn't Manhattan, then where is it? Well, instead of looking at the hellscape that was America during and after Operation Cobalt, let's take a look deep beneath the waves. Of course, I am referring to the USS Pennsylvania, which, in all honesty, despite what the Dead in the Water webisode shows us at the end, should have been an unsurvivable location. Just imagine being trapped miles beneath the sea as your crew begins turning around every single corner. Not only is there no escape, but unlike Manhattan, there is nowhere to hide either. From what I understand, on a submarine like the USS Pennsylvania, there are very few people who are capable of taking you to the surface, with all of them being required to actually execute the action. When navigating the ruins of Manhattan, Your survival is dependent on your own actions, but on a submarine with a crew this large, your life very well may be in the hands of others who would be just as confused and as vulnerable as you. Dead in the Water does a great job depicting the claustrophobic and hopeless feel this environment would bring. Though the elephant in the room here is that they skip over the most terrifying aspect of how they would even resurface without key personnel to operate it. They kind of just make their way to the exit with the sub already beached when they were previously 24 meters underwater, which is unfortunately pretty contrived, but when considering how many other submarines were out there that didn't get the chance to surface, you can only imagine how many walkers are still walking in their steel coffins on the ocean floor. With limited resources, vision, space to navigate, and oxygen, this should be, and in many cases, more than likely is an unsurvivable location to find yourself during the outbreak. I just wish the writing here reflected that reality, but I'm probably asking too much from the guys who did the beer bottle balloon. So we have a metal box that will guarantee your safety, and a metal box that should guarantee your death. But the more I started to think about it, the more I started to wonder if there was a location we've seen or heard about in this franchise that is just as safe short-term as it is deadly. At first I thought maybe somewhere like the CDC, but in the end Rick and company were able to escape, so that can't be it. But then I remembered a man by the name of Valery Vashenko, a Russian cosmonaut contacting Victor Strand who was left alone to watch the world go dark in space. This man was as far and isolated as any human could have possibly been during the outbreak, to the point where he couldn't even experience what a walker was like even if he wanted to. But with that, he was left up there knowing everyone had abandoned him, with everyone capable of bringing him down more than likely already being dead. Mr. Vashenko was guaranteed to die up there, but until that time, he was more at peace than anyone on the surface. Depending on his remaining supplies, Valery could have been alive for weeks to months after he and Victor's conversation. But regardless, if the lack of food, water, or oxygen didn't kill him, the isolation and fear of the inevitable did. So I guess if there's anything to take away from this video, a metal box can either be your savior, killer, or something in between. But what do you guys think? Are there options for either category I may have missed, or do you think I've hit the nail on the head here? Either way, I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on everything we've discussed today. But that is gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching.